I like too. I with that share screen, like I can go to another screen, but it still just keeps the one that I'm sharing up the whole time. Kind of a neat feature.
Yep, it makes it even better if you have dual monitors going too.
Mm-hmm.
Alrighty, I think we're running live. Good afternoon, everyone. Happy Tuesday to you, and thank you for joining us today as we continue our walk through history, the story of God as is revealed within His Word. My name is Nick, and my good friend Alan Sinastrang is with us as always on this Tuesday afternoon. We are members of the Pleasant Plains Church of Christ here in Jackson, Tennessee, and our goal in this study is simply to walk through the story that is found within the Bible to help us grow in our understanding of the text, because we are convinced that a greater understanding, a greater knowledge of the text leads to greater trust and greater faith in God. And of course, if we have greater trust and greater faith in God, then we can be even greater disciples of Him and His Son. And we're thankful that you have joined us today as we continue this walk. We left off last time in Exodus chapter 20. And I think we even went a little bit into, at the end of Exodus chapter 20. And, we just knew we'd have too much fun going through verse by verse, chapters 21 through 31, where we find a lot of additional information within the text. Case laws are giving here for the morality of the children of Israel as they are now in covenant with God, and they have been chosen as His people, and the showing of their loyalty and their trust in God is going to be their obedience to the covenant. And the Lord gives some ways in which that obedience, that loyalty can be carried out in various cases as they're going about their lives. There are also some text within these chapters about the tabernacle, giving some of the information about how it's to be constructed, what is to be done there. Some of the priestly ceremonial laws are given here within the text in chapter 28. I believe it is. Aaron and his sons are identified as being the priest among the people. And then once we get to the end of chapter 31, we see the culmination of Moses' time on top of Mount Sinai in this way. In chapter 31 and verse 18, when he finished being God, finished speaking with Moses on Mount Sinai, he gave him the 2 tablets of the testimony, stone tablets inscribed by the finger of God. If we're going to talk about the works of God given to mankind to help guide us, for us, probably the first thing that comes to our mind is 2 Timothy chapter 3 and verses 16 and 17, where it speaks of scripture being breathed out by God. And Peter gives us a little more information, speaking about how inspired men were moved by the Holy Spirit to write down what we have before us. Well, here Moses kind of one-ups us a little bit. He actually has tablets of stone in which it says that the testimony that is on these tablets they were written out by the finger of God Himself. That is just an incredible thing to think about, with how special we treat our Bibles, recognizing what they are, what it must have been like for Moses as he held these 2 tablets on which the testimony of God had been inscribed by God Himself. That's where we're beginning this morning, and we'll get into chapter 32 in just a moment. Alan, I mentioned Alan is on here with us as always. Alan, good afternoon to you. Hope you are well. What do you think about what we see here at the end of chapter 31, with Moses being able to hold the 2 tablets on which God Himself has written the testimony?
This one's kind of interesting just because, I want to know exactly what's on those 2 tablets. Was this the entire law? The Hammurabi's Code type thing, the entire law on one big tablet? Or was it just, our traditional view of this is, 5 commandments. Actually, later it mentions it's inscribed on both sides,
right?
Which, it's tough to do on a 2D picture and, on our screen. So we usually just have it all on one side. But yeah, I mean, the point here is just the interaction with God in these instances, starting with the 10 Commandments. The people were sitting there before the mountain, and God Himself was on that mountain, and God spoke to them with His own voice, just in the same way He's spoken to Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. He'll speak to Moses. I think in the same way he speaks when Jesus is baptized or on the Mount of Transfiguration. I mean, those, pivotal, theophanies like we've talked about. So not only have they heard God's voice, they've heard his laws, the 10 commandments given to them. Then they said it was too much. So they send Moses as an intermediary to go up there and receive the remaining laws. And now we have God's signature written in his own, by his own finger, which I don't know how to describe it, but I feel like there's no way it would look just like normal. Like I don't know how it would be. I can't describe what I'm thinking, but I feel like they would, if you saw those tablets, there's got to be some way you would know that God himself wrote those. Um, I don't know. I mean, it wouldn't be like the font or something. It might be glowing gold. I don't know
Yeah,
what that
glowing
would look
red
like,
lettering is
but
what it would
you
be.
know, this wouldn't be just, like our picture of the 10 Commandments is just, number one, and then blah, 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 you shall know the God before me. It's got to be more than that, but I don't know exactly even a picture of what that was. But whatever it is, the finger of God touched these stone tablets and put the testimony on there. And I mean, the point of this is just that, he's putting his name on this covenant, and there's no way around the fact that he is, signing this covenant, that it is made. It has been forged in, stone, which is, symbolizes the permanency of this covenant.
Absolutely. And think that is just icing on the cake of what the children of Israel have already experienced, being led out of Egypt by Yahweh, that they were, again, the Lord is acting on his promises that he has made to their father Abraham, that he would bring them into a land of their own, that he would make them into a great nation, that through all these things put together, through their family, the nations of the earth would be blessed. And as he comes into Egypt at the beginning of Exodus and begins to fulfill the promise of bringing them out of the land, now a great nation, and into a land that would be their own. And as he has done such, the way Moses describes it later on in verse number 11, whenever he's talking about the Lord and his anger towards them and what we're about to read, he speaks about him bringing them out of the land of Egypt with great power and a strong hand. They had seen this. And the thing is that they had not only seen the power of God and the results of the power of God, but what they had seen up until this point was some sort of representation of God, almost all along the way, whether it be the pillar of cloud or the flame that was before them. They had seen something about God. And even here, as they're at the foot of this mountain, as they're looking up on Mount Sinai, they see this thunder, the lightning, everything that's going on. And you would be thinking that as Moses is giving these tablets, and as he descends the mountain with Joshua, that he would come onto the scene and the people would be so excited to hear what it is that the Lord would have for them to do. And yet something that really, I mean, if we've done any reading within the Old Testament narrative, what we have seen is that these people unfortunately have a short memory span, and their short memory span hurts them in this way because they forget about God in the way that God has expected them to know him and to remember him. Because what we see in chapter 32 and verse 1, remember, Moses has been on Mount Sinai for quite some time. We'll grant that. Yet when the people saw, verse 1 of chapter 32, that Moses delayed in coming down from the mountain, they gathered around Aaron and said to him, "Come, make gods for us, who will go before us, because this Moses, the man who brought us up from the land of Egypt, we don't know what has happened to him." And Aaron replied to them, "Take off the gold rings that are on your ears, on the ears of your wives, your sons, and your daughters, and bring them to me." So all the people took off the gold rings and that were on their ears and brought them to Aaron. He took the gold from them, fashioned it with an engraving tool, and made it into an image of a calf. And then they said, Israel, "These are your gods who brought you up from the land of Egypt." When Aaron saw this, he built an altar in front of it and made an announcement. "There will be a festival to the Lord tomorrow." Early the next morning, they arose, offered burnt offerings, and presented fellowship offerings. And they sat down to eat and drink. And then As the CSB says, they got up to party. Alan, what do you think about the impatience, maybe? I see this really as a lack of faith and trust in God. They are looking at this as if they've been abandoned, and they're not even considering the fact that of everything the Lord has done for them up to this point, it's just that, it's taking a little bit too long. And because it's taking too long, we need to get this thing rolling again. And they surround, or it says they gathered around Aaron. Give us a little insight into what you think's going on here, kind of detail the scene for us, and then what takes place with this golden calf that is fashioned.
The trick here, and I mean, there's still debate as to what exactly is going on here with this golden calf. I mean, clearly they've seen God. They haven't seen God, but they've seen him come down on the mountain. They've seen evidence for him. It's tough for me. We tend to see this as, okay, they've just, they've forgotten about God, and this golden calf is just Baal or some other god. I don't think that's exactly what's happening here. I think there is still a belief in God, but I think there's a need for something more that they're used to. And think about what the world is used to at this time. They're used to seeing their gods. They're used to having images of their gods, whether it be a calf, a snake, whatever animal is. That's what they are used to coming out of Egypt. So even though they've seen more than enough evidence that God exists and he is powerful, they don't get to see God, physically day by day. They've come as close as they can, considering they can see the pillar of fire and the pillar of cloud, during the day. I mean, they've come about as close as anyone will get until Jesus comes, but that's what they're used to. So think about what's happening here. I don't think they are just completely abandoning Yahweh worship for some other unnamed God here. I think they are trying to mold it into something that they are more used to. And what brings this on here? Well, it's Moses disappearing. He's gone. And think about, we haven't seen it written so far, but think about how they might have viewed Moses here. The verse 1 kind of gives us some insight. Come make gods for us who will go before us, because this Moses, the man who brought us up from the land of Egypt, we don't know what happened to him. So I get the sense that there is still some part of their brains that thinks that it is Moses that has brought them up out of the land of Egypt. Maybe he is a god in a sense. So there could be that aspect. They are creating a replacement for Moses here, this golden calf. They've rejected God's representative, which is Moses, and they've created this golden calf to replace him, which is, a little more understandable, but still bad, just making these, images for someone. Remember what Moses was to them. Even God said it, Moses will be like God to them, and Aaron will be his prophet. So there's already that kind of aspect, that relationship there in some sense. But considering that they've just gotten done hearing the second commandment, you shall make no graven images of any likeness, I think there is some aspect of not replacing God, but having this image of God that's a little more tangible. And that's just not who God is. God is an invisible God. He is one that requires faith, and there is evidence for God, but he is not confined to an image of anything. He is greater than that. So for them to do this, like I said, I don't think they're saying, well, I'm not going to worship God anymore, but I think they are trying to worship God in a smaller and a more physical and in a way that they are more familiar with. Because I mean, so far, the Ten Commandments, all of these laws, I mean, these are very, very different from anything anyone's ever seen. This monotheism that they are talking about is a complete change from anything that has been seen up to this point. So that's why it mentions, make gods for us. They're used to multiple gods, but now they're supposed to be worshiping the one true God. And I think their desire is, okay, we'll worship God, we'll worship, Moses in a sense. He's God's representative, kind of like a demigod. Think of it that way. Like, there's always like Zeus, and then there's Hercules, was a half man, half god. I mean, that's not uncommon. So that's kind of maybe how they viewed Moses. So again, this isn't as cut and dry as just, they abandoned God and they're just worshiping this, you know, stupid calf right here. It's a little more nuanced than that, but it's still a rebellion against, what they should have been and how they should have been worshiping. And you mentioned, you highlighted gathered right here. Uh, there's a lot of loaded terms in this section, and gathered is one. I kind of felt for Aaron a little bit, because you know, this is more of a violent, threatening term than just, hey, they all kind of got together and we're talking. This is, the crowds pressing against him to make these changes. So uh, it's amazing. It's also sad that it came to this point. This mob is, requiring Aaron to do this, and you know, Aaron's guilty as well. He does all this things for them. He takes it and makes this image and this golden calf. And you'll want to remember this phrase: "These are your gods who brought you up from the land of Egypt." That's gonna come up a few other times, I think, during the scriptures as well. But yeah, this isn't as cut and dry is what I'm trying to get as it may seem.
Yeah, whenever we look at this, again, so much of this is completely disconnected from us and our understanding of God and theology, religion in general. For them, the image of a calf or a cow, a bull, some sort of bovine creature was very common in the ancient pagan religions. Many gods were seen either as having god heads, or excuse me, having bull or cow heads, or they were seen as standing and being founded upon a cow of some sort, just because cows provide so much for us in regards to resources, whether it be milk or meat. They reproduce pretty well, so they're seen as being very important. Therefore, the provisions they give to mankind, for that reason, then people used to project that type of image upon deities in the ancient times, and especially among pagan religions. I think what you said, Alan, about that gathered portion, that gathered word is really key here. It isn't just a suggestion, no, that this is a coup. They are rising up against Aaron, and they're taking over, and they're saying, this is what you need to do. And then it's interesting to me what Aaron tells them to do. He says, take off the gold rings. Well, where did they get these gold rings? Remember, as they're coming up out of Egypt, they basically plundered Egypt. So these are the resources that God blessed them with after showing his power over Egypt. And now they're taking these resources that he gave to them, he blessed them with, and they're using it against him to fashion this animal that they're going to bow down and say, these are the gods. This is who brought us up out of Egypt. And like you said, up until this point, they had some sort of representation about God. They will see something about him with their eyes. And yet they haven't seen that for a little bit now. And they're beginning to doubt. They're beginning to falter. But what really maybe is most disturbing about this entire text is what we see in verse number 6, that early in the next morning they arose, they offered burnt offerings, presented fellowship offerings. The people sat down to eat and drink. They got up to party. For us, we're thinking God was a party. They were hanging around and talking. But again, a very much loaded term here. This is a word to identify pagan idolatry. And more than likely, some sexual deeds were involved in this, because that's what they had always seen. They'd always seen pagan idolatry and worship that had incorporated some sort of sexual elements. So what is going on here, and what we're going to read here in just a second, is that this has turned into just a rave of some sorts, we might say. It was not anything that was calm. It wasn't organized. These people were absolutely going crazy, it seems, based upon what Joshua says and then what Moses says about Aaron, how Aaron has just completely lost control of the people. So the scene that is happening here was not something to be taken lightly. And God, of course, being on the mountain, Moses being on the mountain with Joshua, Moses and Joshua would not have been aware what's going on at the foot of the mountain, but God, of course, is. He knows all things, sees all things, which is why he launches into verse number 7 that the Lord spoke to Moses, go down at once. Why? Because this is serious. What's going on is very serious business, a very serious transgression. For your people you brought up from the land of Egypt have acted corruptly. They have quickly, notice that where they've quickly turned away from the way I commanded them. They have made for themselves an image of a calf. They have bowed down to it, sacrificed to it, and said, Israel, these are your gods who brought you up from the land of Egypt. The Lord said to Moses, I have seen this people, that they are indeed a stiff-necked people. Now leave me alone so that my anger can burn against them and I can destroy them. And then I will make you, he's speaking to Moses here, I will make you into a great nation. But Moses sought the favor of the Lord, his God. Lord, why does your anger burn against your people you brought out of the land of Egypt? What with great power and a strong hand? Why should the Egyptians say he brought them out with an evil intent to kill them in the mountains and eliminate them from the face of the earth? Turn from your fierce anger and relent concerning this disaster plan for your people. Remember, verse 13, remember your servants Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, or Jacob. You swore to them by yourself and declared that I will make your offspring as numerous as the stars of the sky, and will give your offspring all this land that I have promised, and they will inherit it forever. So the Lord relented concerning the disaster he had said he would bring on his people. Again, what has taken place at the foot of the mountain was a very serious transgression, so serious, in fact, that the Lord is ready to do what he's already done a number of times. He restarted from inside the garden, outside the garden, from chapters 3 to 4. He then restarted the human population with the family of Noah in Genesis chapter 9. Then he narrowed that down again to the Abrahamic family in Genesis chapter 12. And he grew up that family into what they are today. And now he's ready to wipe them out, it seems, Alan. And he says, Moses, I'm going to start over with you again. This is certainly a serious situation. And we see Moses, though, we see his care and concern for the people. And the fact that yes, he's going to be very angry with them once he gets down off the mountain and once he sees what has taken place. But that anger, so much of it is done out of love. He loves his people and he wants to see them do what is right. He wants them to survive, but then he's going to go on and correct them, as we'll see. But then Moses here intercedes for the people, which is what a good prophet and a good intercessor does. Tries to I don't want to say talk the Lord down, but just and not remind him in the sense that we need to be reminded. But really, Moses is showing here his faithfulness to God's promises and saying, hey, you've done this, done this. We can make it through this particular issue as well. Alan, what do you see here beginning in verse 7 with the Lord's response and how Moses then responds to the Lord?
I find myself with the study noticing little just interesting things like pronouns and how they're used. And verse 7 is kind of interesting. The Lord spoke to Moses, go down at once, for your people, talking to Moses, your people you brought up from the land of Egypt. He doesn't say my people in this instance. He doesn't say, the people that I brought up. He says your people. And this isn't the Lord, casting blame on Moses in any way. I mean, this isn't Moses's fault at all. But I think this is highlighting the distance. This was God's people. And now, because of the corruption and they're breaking a covenant. We'll see. They've broken the covenant. So this is no longer the people of God in the same way, to the point that, he's willing to, wipe them out except for Moses and start fresh with Moses, which legitimately could have happened. And it would have been fine. We'd have a completely different looking Bible. We'd have, we wouldn't have the books of Joshua and Judges quite the same, the preceding generations. And we'd have a whole different story. But I mean, we would have still ended up with Christ, I think, even if that had happened. So God could have done that, but it's interesting that word your, and then Moses, when he is seeking the favor starting in verse 11, why does your anger burn against your people? He's reminding, and I mean, reminding the Lord, is the best term. The Lord doesn't need reminding, but he is just notating that, this is your people. You brought them out of the land of Egypt. It wasn't me. I mean, he was just the means, but God was the one that did that. You were the ones, and he appeals to God's glory, his promises. Verse 13: remember your servant that you swore to them. He's I mean, this is, like you said, this is Moses being a good mediator, intermediate. I can't even think of the word. Intermediate that, but
Intercessor.
Intercessor. Yeah, that's what I'm trying to think of. And of course, the Lord relented. I think some versions say repented there, which is kind of not a bad term, because it's true, but we think of repenting as turning away from sin, which right. This wasn't. This way we just, that word can just mean changing course, turning around, and that's fine. The Lord's allowed to do that. He's still going to keep his promises with them, but again, like he could have wiped them out and still kept all of the promises that he made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It just would have taken a lot longer, several more generations for that nation to grow again. So that could have happened, but because of Moses' mediation here, the Lord relents concerning the disaster, and notice that he would bring on his people. So the people is his once again, but there's going to be a change here because of that broken covenant.
Right. Well, something I mentioned in our last study is just the need to see this covenant and the importance of believing loyalty, that the people need to believe. They need to believe what is said back in chapter 20 and verse number 2. They needed to believe that that Yahweh, the one who was speaking to them in that moment, that he was the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the place of slavery. And if they believed that, then they would realize that they were indebted to him for what he had done for them, and that belief needed to be shown through their loyalty and through their trust in him. And what we've seen right here is there's not been loyalty, and that breaking of loyalty, and that unwillingness to trust in him and to obey him, it's going to lead to consequences. We're going to see those consequences here in just a second. Let's pick up in verse 15. After the Lord and Moses have had this discussion concerning how the Lord is going to respond to the people's disloyalty at this moment, then Moses turned and went down the mountain with the 2 tablets of the testimony in his hands. And this harkens back to chapter 31 and verses 8 and verse 18. They were inscribed on both sides, inscribed front and back. The tablets were the work of God, and the writing was God's writing engraved on the tablets. And when Joshua heard the sound of the people as they shouted, he said to Moses, there is a sound of war in the camp. He's thinking that this noise, and Alter has a note here in his translation from verse number 6, that the strong implication is this a bacchanalian celebration accompanied by food and drink, that involves shouting and song and dance and probably some orgiastic activity as well. So he's hearing what's going on here. This just, again, sounds like a rave, sounds like some great commotion, not what you would expect coming back down from the mountain from Joshua's point of view, which probably goes to show that Joshua has no idea what's going on. He has not been privy to the reality of the situation as Moses has at the hearing it from God himself. So Moses replies, verse 18, it's not the sound of a victory cry and not the sound of a cry of defeat. I hear the sound of singing. And as he approached the camp and saw the calf and the dancing, Moses became enraged and he threw the tablets out of his hand, smashing them on the base of the mountain. He took the calf they had made, burned it up, and ground it to powder. He scattered the powder over the surface of the water and forced the Israelites to drink the water. And then Moses asked Aaron, what did these people do to you, that you have led them into such a grave sin? Aaron replies, "Don't be enraged, my lord. You yourself know that the people are intent on evil. They said to me, 'Make gods for us who will go before us, because it's Moses, the man who brought us up from the land of Egypt. We don't know what has happened to him.' So I said to them, 'Whoever has gold, take it off.' And they gave it to me. When I threw it into the fire, out came this calf," which, of course, is probably one of the more humorous portions of scripture. Just an absolutely ridiculous excuse. Though we might give Aaron a few points, just simply because this type of thing, throwing gold or some sort of metal into a fire and out jumping a an idol of some sort, there are a few stories in pagan or an ancient pagan mythology, I guess you might say, the way their gods came to be, of that type of thing happening. Maybe he's just borrowing from them, saying, "Hey, you've heard other people do it. The same thing happened here." Nonetheless, Moses is certainly upset about what he sees, and his anger is shown in the fact that, one, he smashes the tablets, and then two, he grinds up the idol itself and makes the people drink from it. Alan, this is certainly an interesting portion here from many different perspectives. Joshua's innocence, really, his ignorance and not knowing what was going on, the way Moses responds, and then the excuses that are offered up by Aaron here.
I like verse 20. Just the desecration is so complete with this calf. Just reminding them that he took it, he burned it up. So this is something that cannot protect itself from being destroyed. And not only did he burn it up, he ground it into powder. He scattered the powder in the water and forced the Israelites to drink it. So they will have to taste the bitterness of their sins,
Oh,
and
good.
and that gold is so scattered, and of course then it's going to pass through everybody's bodies. I mean, it has been completely and utterly, I mean, that would be a ceremonial uncleaning, if you will, of that gold, and just the fact that it's been scattered and drunk and passed through people. I mean, that gold will never be used in any way again. So it's not just like they broke it up and then tossed it in a pile, and sometime down the road someone made it into earrings again or something. That gold that was used, that calf, is completely ceased to exist, if you will, and almost completely. So the idea again is that, I mean, this is not a god. This is not the God that can bring you out of the land of Egypt. You're replacing the one that can do that with this simple, insignificant, lifeless image that can do nothing and can protect against nothing, and is easily destroyed. So just a lot of good symbolism with that, with what he does, more than just smashing it.
Right, and it shows then that Moses wasn't just completely out of control as the people were. He was, it seems, very temperate in what he did, and he is very intentional with the
Mhm.
way he went about expressing his anger with the people. I think what you're saying with the way he ground up the idol and made the people drink it, I think that's really good insight there. Uh, and what we see here is that this began, it seems at least, that Moses lays a lot of the blame at the foot of Aaron, that you let this happen, because we see in verse 25 that Moses saw that the people were out of control, for Aaron had let them get out of control, making them a laughing stock to their enemies. And Moses stood at the camp's entrance and said, "Whoever is for the Lord, come to me." And notice who comes to him. All the Levites gathered around him, and he told them, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. Every man fasten his sword to his side, go back and forth through the camp from entrance to entrance, and kill, and each of you kill his brother, his friend, his neighbor." And the Levites did as Moses commanded, and about 3,000 men fell that day among the people. Afterward, Moses said, Today you have been dedicated. You have committed a grave sin. Now I will go up to the Lord. Perhaps I will be able to atone for your sin." So Moses returned to the Lord and said, "Oh, these people have committed a grave sin. They have made a god of gold for themselves. Now, if you would only forgive their sin, but if not, please erase me from the book you have written. And the Lord replied to Moses, whoever has sinned against me, I will erase from my book. Now go, lead the people to the place I told you about. See, my angel will go before you. But on the day I settle accounts, I will hold them accountable for their sin. And the Lord inflicted a plague on the people for what they did with the calf, with the calf Aaron had made. Here within this text, Alan, we see a certain group of people rise up, and they assert themselves in a position of leadership, you might say, because of their willingness to go in and to punish those who had been evildoers. Again, had started in a sense with Aaron, who was a Levite, and now it's going to be the Levites who are going to finish this as well. It doesn't seem, best I could tell, we talked about it before, verse 28 says that Aaron and his sons, Nadab and Abihu, they had been the ones that were put in priestly roles. Maybe there have been other people at this time who were also serving in those roles. Maybe they were the ones who came up with this plan to offer up offerings and such for the people. Whether that was the case or not, whether it was just Aaron and his sons, we see the Levites as a whole now step up and play a big part in the atoning, we might say, of the sins of the people here. And then we see Moses himself too, wanting to know what he can do to atone for the sins of the people so that they can continue on with God and continue on to the promises that had been made to their father Abraham.
Yeah, I love verse 32. Now, if you only forgive their sin, but if not, please erase me from the book you have written. So despite Moses' anger, and remember what God had already offered to him. Basically, he said, get out of the way, let me strike them down, and I will make you a great nation instead. I mean, that would be awesome. That's a pretty cool thing to happen. I mean, we'd be talking about Moses pretty much in the same vein as Abraham. Through your offspring, all the nations of the earth will be blessed. He would probably receive those same blessings that Abraham did. So he would be basically another patriarch, if that in that way. But Moses, doesn't even think about that. He is concerned for the people. He acknowledges that they have sinned, but he's willing to cast his lot with them and even take the blame, take the atonement for him. So I mean, obviously that's why there's so many parallels with Moses and Christ, but there's a little bit of difference with Moses. He offers his life for them. I mean, that's love. I mean, that's what we know love is to offer, to give your life for your brothers, to give your life for someone else. And that's what Christ does. Moses offers that, but the Lord obviously rejects that. And Moses saves the whole of the people, but not all of the people. We see that 3,000 fall. We see that the Lord inflicted a plague later on, which usually this isn't just a simple plague, boils or something. I mean, this is usually more death on the people. So I would assume that those that were the ringleaders, the ones that were actively involved in this apostasy, were the ones that suffered by the plague here. So even Moses' atonement was not enough to save these wicked ones. God still has to cleanse those, that sin from the people, which I think highlights, Christ's atonement, which offers redemption of sins for all and that follow him. So, but obviously Moses is looking pretty good here for his love and his ability to mediate with God and God listening to him, which makes sense. I mean, what do we know about Moses so far? He's dedicated. He's loving. He's caring for his people. He's passionate about serving God to the point where he throws the stone tablets down. I mean, it is every fiber of his being is serving God, and that's why he's has such a close relationship with God here.
I think what you mentioned there about surely this wasn't all. It says that 3,000 were killed on that day. That does not seem to be the entirety of the number of people who were participating in this rebellion of sorts. Probably was more likely the leaders who had really instigated this, and maybe the ones who had continued on even after Moses had come down. But the Lord was still going to hold people accountable. How does he do that? Verse 35, that he inflicted a plague on the people for what they had done with the calf that Aaron had made. But they survived. The good news is that even with this horrible behavior, these very poor decisions that were made, the people, they were spared for the most part, though they were punished with some being killed and then the others inflicted with a plague. They still continued on, and the goal of reaching the promised land and establishing them as a people within the land, that was still before them. And this is how Moses's role goes on from here, because things seem to change based upon what takes place here in chapter 32. Because chapter 33 says that the Lord spoke to Moses, "Go up from here, you and the people you brought from the land of Egypt, to the land I promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, saying, I will give it to your offspring. I will send an angel ahead of you, and will drive out the Canaanites, Amorites, Hittites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. Go up to a land flowing with milk and honey, but I will not go up with you." Notice that. Hold on to that. "But I will not go up with you, because you are a stiff-necked people. Otherwise, I might destroy you on the way." And when people heard this bad news, they mourned and didn't put on their jewelry. For the Lord said to Moses, "Tell the Israelites, you are a stiff-necked people, and if I went up with you for a single moment, I will destroy you. Now take off your jewelry, and I will decide what to do with you." So the Israelites remained stripped of their jewelry from Mount Horeb onward. So here we see that the Lord is going to continue on with these people. What he has said, bringing them into this land overflowing with milk and honey, he's going to do that. Yet he puts forth that it's not going to be the same as it was before. Because remember, as they traveled before, they had the pillar of cloud and the fire as well. But he says, now it's not going to be me. It's just going to be an angel going before you, another spiritual being going before you. It's not going to be me, myself. It's going to be someone else going for you. And the people are terrified by this. The jewelry comes into play again, this jewelry that they had used as being what made the calf, this jewelry that had been given to them as they plundered Egypt. Now, in a sense, God is plundering it from them, that he's taking it back from them so they cannot wear it any longer. But the good news, Alan, is they're still marching onward. It just isn't going to be the same as it was before.
And I think that's the key of this whole passage. It's just, up until this point, the relationship has been, God and his people, like how God intended, the Lord, Emmanuel, God with us, the Lord dwelling with his people, and as much of a sense as as he can, as close. This is as close to a return to the garden, I think, as you can get. But now, because of that first covenant being broken, and those tablets, Moses throwing those tablets down was more than just a symbol. I mean, that covenant was broken. So now there will be another covenant here, and notice God uses the same type. He reminds them that the same type of language: I promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, I'll drive you out of the land, or go ahead of you and drive out the Canaanites, and listing all the Izzites. All that language is the same. It's repeated. So it ties those promises together, but there's more of a distance, which you think about it, that makes sense. Like, imagine, God as a husband and the Israelites as a wife, and that wife has just cheated on the husband. Well, the husband stays with the wife, but that relationship is changed. And there's going to be, I mean, if that happened to any one of us, there would be a distance between the two to overcome. So God is removing himself a little bit, and this is merciful, because if his presence was still with Israel in the same way that it was before, he would break out and destroy them. So this is a merciful on the Israelites, that they aren't more destroyed than what already happened with the plague. But of course, they understand, verse 4, when you heard the bad news, they were mourning. and they didn't put on their jewelry. I think this phrase is kind of the old equivalent of, tearing their clothes in sackcloth and ashes is later. And they spend the next, travel journey here as in a state of mourning. And then, getting a little bit ahead here, verse 7, you see a change with the tent. Verse 7, now Moses took a tent and pitched it outside the camp at a distance from the camp. He called it the tent of meeting, and anyone who wanted to consult the Lord would go to the tent of the meeting that was outside of the camp. So before, the Lord was in the midst of the camp, but now there is this tent that, he remains separate in a little bit of a sense from his people. And Moses has to go out there and speak with him that way. And it's kind of interesting, as the people would still see the pillar, but they would see it at a distance. But the Lord, I love how the Lord's relationship with Moses here, verse 11. The Lord would speak with Moses face to face, just as a man speaks with his friend. Then Moses would return to camp. So, I wonder if part of this is just he still wants to have that close relationship with his people. Well, the people as a whole have broken that. Mm-hmm. And really, Moses and Joshua, look who is with him. They were the two that were not a part of that rebellion, were not part of that breaking of the covenant. So the only two that can still have that type of face-to-face relationship is Moses, and then of course Joshua as well. And the Lord speaks to him differently than he does the people, face to face. I mean, we've already seen just almost normal dialogue between the two back and forth before. So just a wonderful relationship, and I think as close to what God desires in his relationship with us as we can see in the text here. Just face to face as a friend. That's what God wants from us as well. But what do? We separate ourselves from him, but through our sins.
You can tell that the people recognize the special relationship that Moses has with God, and the fact that, verse number 8, whenever he went out to the tent, all the people would stand up, each one at the door of his tent, and they would watch Moses until he entered the tent. And then as the people saw, verse 10, as they saw the pillar of cloud remaining at the entrance to the tent, they would stand up, then bow and worship, each one at the door of his tent. They realized that this was something special. This was a special relationship between their leader Moses and the God who was the true leader of the people. And you can see that Moses understands this relationship, which is why verse number 12, Moses said to the Lord, "Look, you have told me, lead this people up, but you have not let me know whom you will send with me." Remember, he said back in verse number 3, "Go up to the land flowing with milk and honey, but I will not go with you." Okay, so the Lord has said, I will not be the one to lead you. Moses asked that question, or he says, "You have not let me know who you will send with me. You said, I know you by name, and you have also found favor with me. Now, if I have indeed found favor with you, please teach me your ways, and I will know you, so I may find favor with you. Now consider that this nation is your people." And he, being God, replied, "My presence will go with you, and I will give you rest." Moses responds then, "If your presence does not go, don't make us go up from here. How will it be known that I and your people have found favor with you unless you go with us? I and your people will be distinguished by this from all the other people on the face of the earth." The Lord answered Moses, verse 17, "I will do this very thing you have asked me, for you have found favor with me, and I know you by name." And then Moses said, "Please let me see your glory." And he said, "I will cause all my goodness to pass in front of you. I will proclaim the name the Lord before you. I will be gracious to whom I will be gracious. I will have compassion on whom I will have compassion." But he added, "You cannot see my face, for humans cannot see me and live." And the Lord said, "Here is a place near me. You are to stand on the rock. And when my glory passes by, I will put you in the crevice of the rock and cover you with my hand until I pass by. And then I will take my hand away, and you will see my back, but my face will not be seen. Moses here, though is experiencing this great relationship with the Lord, he does have a concern. And the concern is the fact that the Lord has said, I'm not going to go with you. I am not going to go before you. He does say, I'm going to send an angel before you, but I myself am not going to go with you. Moses is worried about that. If you are not going to go with me, if your presence is not with us, then Lord, how are we going to be any different than the people of the nations around us? See, Moses seems very, very sure of the fact that what separates his people from any other people is the God they serve. That their Yahweh is the God of gods, and he is the Lord of lords, and he is the one who has power over everyone else. He says, if you don't go with us, well, what's going to be special about us? But then he asks, verse 18, let me see your glory. And the Lord makes an interesting comment here. And he says, you cannot see my face, for humans cannot see me and live. Here's the issue, at least the perceived issue with that. The Lord had already shown his face to some people. I go back to Genesis 18, and the Lord being there with two of his angels and speaking with Abraham at the tent by the oaks of Mamre. So, Alan, from your perspective, how do you understand Moses' concern here? What do you think about him asking to be able to see the Lord's glory? And then how do we reconcile this with the fact that the Lord has made appearances in bodily form, it seems, in other places up to this point in Scripture?
First off, just to highlight the difference between Moses and Israel here. The people, what have they been doing? They saw God at the Mount Sinai when he gave the 10 Commandments, and then they said that was too much. They didn't want to hear God's voice. It was too much for them. So it's already starting to separate. Whereas, and of course, then they make the golden calf. They want to remove themselves more from God and his glory. Well, Moses is the complete opposite. He is, he's clamoring to, trying, please teach me your ways. If my presence, that he's desiring the presence of God, and he knows that without that presence, it won't be as good. And, he wants to, please let me see your glory. Israel's going away from God. Moses is trying to get as close to God as possible. And that's beautiful. That's what it's supposed to be. And God gives him what he wants. I think because of Moses' desire for that closeness, I think God still has a closeness with Israel as a, second hand because of Moses asking this. And then he even gives him this amazing thing to see his goodness pass in front of you. I will proclaim the name of the Lord. I'll be gracious, but you cannot see my face. So the way I see this, there's obviously the Lord can do what he wants. To see the full glory and face of God, I think that's what it's talking about here. You cannot see me and live, but he can show his goodness. He can show his name. He can show his graciousness. He can show his compassion. Later on, he will show us his son, who was the fullness of God.
Mm-hmm.
I think back, I wanted to make sure we kind of looked at this chapter. It's chapter 24, and there's this covenant ceremony. And notice it's the Lord says, he calls up Aaron, Nadab, and Abihu, and 70 of Israel's elders, and they approached the Lord. The others did not approach. So there's this group that has approached the Lord, and they kind of go up partially up to the mountain. They offer sacrifices, and look at verse 9. Then Moses went up with Aaron, Nadab, and Abihu, and 70 of the elders. Verse 10, and they saw the God of Israel. Beneath his feet was something like pavement made of lapis, whatever that word is, as clear as the sky itself. God did not harm the Israelite nobles. They saw him, and they ate and drank. Well, what did they see? Did they see the face of God here? I don't know. I don't know what amount of glory they saw here, but clearly, I think there can be levels. Seeing a portion of God or a limited part of him, which makes sense. I mean, God cannot be contained into one face or one. I mean, he is everywhere, so he can choose to reveal himself in his fullness or in as little as possible. Um, and like you said with Abraham, he just looked like a man there, so it's some sort of limited scene or theophany in that sense. I think there's a little bit more right here, and Revelation, what John saw in his vision was a large portion of the fullness of God, and then even seeing Jesus himself. I mean, it says we saw the fullness of God. Well, he came to us. They were able to see him, and one, not recognize him, or two, actually stand and talk to him, just like we would any other man. Uh, so to take that phrase, which I think what the a big hangup was for the Israelites in Jesus' day. They cannot see the face of God. Well, then how can they see God's? How can Jesus be God's son? Because I can see him. If we cannot see the face of God and live, well, and I'm looking at Jesus and I'm living, then he must not be God. So they've taken that one phrase and limited it in a sense, and limited God. I mean, can he not show us a portion of his glory? Can he not reveal his goodness in this sense, or his mercy, or his son? He can reveal whatever part of it he wants, and choose to, choose to reveal enough to destroy someone, or choose to reveal enough to convict someone. Whatever he wants to do, he can do. So yeah, I think that's one of those phrases that has been, I guess, corrupted in a way, but it's we shouldn't take it so literally, because again, I mean, does God even have a face? I mean, that's a lot of language talking about God is anthropomorphizing, putting
Right.
human words on, things that we have no spiritual things that we have little to no understanding of. We're just trying to get as close as possible. And I mean, a face makes sense to us, but to take it too literally, I think is pretty wrong.
Yeah, just think about Jesus with the transfiguration. There was something that changed about him as he went up on the mountain with Peter, James, and John, that they understood there was a difference between the Jesus they saw in that moment with the Jesus they had been with. I think that's true about God as well. That God seems up to this point, I think, very clearly to have some sort of bodily form that he is able to come down to earth and to exist in for the benefit of man. I think here's part of that. I think as part of that is in Genesis 18. We see a little more of that here in what we're going to see whenever Moses does hide in the rock, and all he can see is able to see the backside of the Lord, not able to see his actual face. Maybe that's more of a glorified form, more of the radiance of God. But even Moses himself, what we're going to see in a few chapters, is that Moses, his own face is going to be radiated in a sense. He's going to reflect some glory of God here in a sense. But I think what is most important to recognize here is, number one, the fact that the Lord said, I am going to go with you. I will go with you. My presence will go with you. I will give you rest. Verse 17, I will do this very thing you have asked, for you have found favor with me, and I know you by name. I'm going to lead you, the Lord says. But then number two, just shows the incredible nature of God. The fact that the Lord says here, men cannot see my face as I truly am, we might say. God who he truly is, you just can't see my face. And that's really true of any theophany that we see within Scripture. Whenever men come in contact with God in any sense, it is an incredible moment. And you think about Moses up to this point, he had already had some theophanies with God even before the whole Exodus thing took place. The burning bush was a theophany between him and God, and he saw God's glory and radiance in a sense there. And maybe he's thinking, I was pretty cool. I really appreciate that. I gained something from that. Lord, if you wanted to give me another little boost in some sort of that way, please feel free to. And the Lord says, I'll do that with what's going to take place with passing before him and him being able to see his back and such. But chapter 34, finishes out our study for today. Let's go back and remember the end of chapter 31. The Lord made these tablets that he himself wrote the testimony on with his own hands. We read in chapter 32 and verse number 15 that these two tablets, they were inscribed on both sides, inscribed in front and back. The tablets were the work of God, and the writing was God's writing engraved on the tablets. We see in verse 19 that Moses became enraged at what he saw within the camp, the pagan idolatry that was going on, and he smashed them on the base of the mountain. And then we get to chapter 34 and verse 1, and the Lord said to Moses, cut 2 stone tablets like the first one. So here are the replacement tablets, like the first ones, but they're not going to be as good. And I will write on them the words that were on the first tablets, which you broke. So these are copies of what was originally given to Moses. He says, be prepared.
And Moses made these.
Right. So
notice the difference. God made the first two, and Moses makes these. The finger, the writing is still God, but there is a change here.
Absolutely.
In this covenant,
which again comes as a result of the first covenant that was embodied within those tablets being broken by what we see in chapter 32. He says, verse 2, be prepared by morning, come up on Mount Sinai in the morning and stand before me on the mountaintop. No one may go with you. In fact, no one should even be seen anywhere on the mountain. Even the flocks and the herds are not to graze in front of that mountain. So Moses cut 2 stone tablets like the first ones. He got up early in the morning, and taking the 2 stone tablets in his hands, he climbed Mount Sinai, just as the Lord had commanded him. And the Lord came down in a cloud, stood with him there, and proclaimed his name. That's just an incredible thing about it. He came down in a cloud and stood with him there and proclaimed his name, the Lord. The Lord passed in front of him and proclaimed the Lord. The Lord is a compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger and abounding in faithful love and truth, maintaining faithful love to 1,000 generations, forgiving iniquity, rebellion, and sin. But he will not leave the guilty unpunished, bringing the father's iniquity on the children and the grandchildren to the 3rd and 4th generation. And Moses immediately knelt low on the ground and worshipped. And then he said, my Lord, if I have indeed found favor with you, my Lord, please go with us, even though this is a stiff-necked people. Forgive our iniquity and our sin, and accept us as your own possession. Alan, what stands out to me is that those verses 5 through 7, especially the latter part there, sounds very much like what we saw as the Lord spoke to the people concerning the 10 commandments of those who transgressed against him, specifically the 3rd commandment about the 2nd commandment about not making an idol. You don't bow down to worship them, and if you do, there's going to be punishments. But where he speaks of punishment, there's also faithful love and grace and mercy from God here. So this particular study, Alan has an inclusio for us. It is 2 bookends. It begins with tablets given by God representing the covenant, and it's going to end with 2 tablets. This time built by Moses, still inscribed by God, but reaffirming what he expects of the people, because they certainly needed a reminder given what we've seen in this study.
And Moses' prayer here, if we at the end, verse 9, go with us. Remember, he was concerned about not having the full presence of God going with them going forward. So he asked him, go with us, forgive our iniquity and our sin. No Moses' language there, our. This was not his sin, but he is part of the people, and I wonder just how much by his connecting and placing himself in the midst of the people there, that was probably a big portion of why they still existed at this point. Because of God's love for Moses, he didn't destroy the people, and God listened to Moses. So just a great lesson for us and our mediator. Christ came and stood with us, amongst us on this earth. And if we gather to him, then that, because of our association with him, I think that is what keeps the wrath, our just wrath of God keeps us from suffering that. And notice that last one, accept us as your own possession. That's what he promises to do to all those who who put on Christ. I mean, we are adopted, we become His own. So that's, again, we've talked about this a lot. Just what we're seeing here, there, this is not anything different from what we see later on. There are so many connections and so many of the same thing happening in the new covenant that happened in this first covenant here, that we can help us to better understand what we should do and our role, and what God is wanting to do, which is to for us to be His. He wants us to be His possession, His own. And for Him, from God's point of view, He wants to be with His people. So He did that by sending His Son, and we look forward to a fuller measure of that when we are with Him after these days are over.
Absolutely. Alan, thank you so much for everything that you have shared with us today, for your deep study in the text, and sharing with us so many good nuggets of insight that can help us understand the text better. As I mentioned at the get-go, we are wanting to simply walk through the narrative of the scriptures that begins in Genesis and works its way throughout the rest of the Bible. And in doing so, we hope to know the scripture better, so that we can have a greater trust in God, and then therefore have a greater faith in God. In our next study, we're going to highlight a few other portions here of Exodus. Because not everything here is narrative, we're going to do a summary of some of these texts, and then try to hit the narrative as we go throughout the next few books, as we round out the Torah, or the Pentateuch, over the next few weeks. So if we're not, say, because we're in Genesis 32 and 33 today, whenever you join on Friday, and we're not in Exodus 32 and 33 today, whenever you get here on Friday and we're not right in Exodus 34, you haven't missed anything. We're just kind of bouncing around a little bit, trying to stay focused on the narrative, and then add in details that are going to help us to understand it a little better as we work our way through. And of course, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to reach out to us, leave a comment on the Pleasant Plains Facebook page, send us a message there, and we'd love to help you out in any way we can, especially if you have any spiritual needs. We would love to speak with you about that. But we do look forward to you joining us again on Friday as we continue to walk through history. Alan, do you have any other closing thoughts you want to share with us this afternoon?
Definitely let us know. Either send us a text or leave a little note on the Facebook page. But Friday is going to be a little bit different, just because we are kind of hitting some high points and just some highlights, maybe some just a few little laws and things that we feel like might come up later on in the narrative. So if you have any suggestions, certain laws you might want to look at or you didn't quite understand, we'll probably spend some time talking about the tabernacle and maybe the priesthood a little bit, maybe some sacrifices, just things like that, because I think it's good to understand those going forward as we go through the rest of the Bible narrative. You need to kind of have a little bit of foundation on those. So we'll spend just just hit the highlights on those, really not get too deep. But if you have any others that you want to talk about, then let us know.
Absolutely. Yeah. If we did just march straight through the text, then we would, I don't know, we might have a kid in high school by the time we get done finishing up with everything. But Alan, thank you again so much. Thank you all for joining us today. Hope that you benefited from our walk through history, and that is found here within Exodus 32 and 33. We invite you to join us again on Friday as we continue that walk. And if you, again, just reemphasize, if you do have any questions, comments, suggestions, please feel free to reach out and let us know those things. Have a great rest of your day. Have a great rest of your Tuesday. May God bless you in all that you do as you seek Him and seek to serve Him, and to show your faith and trust in Him in all that you do. Everybody, God bless. Have a great rest of your day, and hope we see you on Friday as we continue